Have you ever loved someone so deeply that you built your entire life around them, only to watch them tear that very life apart in front of your eyes? That's exactly what happened to me, Isabella Moore. I used to believe love could conquer anything, that loyalty would always be enough to keep two people together. But life, as I painfully learned, has a cruel sense of irony. When I met Madison 3 years ago, I thought I had finally found the man every woman dreams of, the man who listens when you speak, who smiles through your silence, and who makes ordinary moments feel like poetry. He wasn't just handsome. He was charming, intelligent, and knew how to make you feel seen in a crowded room. At least that's who he pretended to be. Back then, I was a real estate analyst working at a mid-tier firm in London, trying to climb my way up in a world that didn't take women too seriously unless they had the right connections. Madison came from a modest background, or so he said, and worked as a financial consultant. We met at a corporate mixer where he introduced himself with a grin that made you forget where you were. "You look like someone who doesn't belong in this chaos," he had said, handing me a glass of champagne. "You're right," I laughed. "I was just planning my escape." He smiled, and that's how it began. Our romance was quick, intoxicating, and disarming. Within months, we were inseparable. He was attentive, supportive, and seemed genuinely proud of me. He'd often tell his friends, "My wife is the smartest woman I know," even before he proposed. So when he got down on one knee during our weekend trip to Edinburgh and asked me to marry him, I didn't hesitate. I said yes because I believed every word he'd ever said. I believed he was the one person who would never betray me. The first year of marriage was beautiful, or maybe I just wanted it to be. We moved into a charming suburban house just outside the city, one I purchased under my name but presented as our home. Madison was struggling with some debts at the time, and I wanted to help him rebuild without bruising his pride. So I put everything in both our names on paper, but the deed, the legal ownership, remained mine. He didn't know that detail. I trusted him too much to think it would ever matter. We spent evenings cooking together, laughing over spilled wine, talking about dreams that now seem foolish in hindsight. He'd talk about starting his own business someday, and I supported him with every ounce of belief I had. I helped him set up his first financial advisory startup, even used part of my savings to cover his startup costs. I didn't see it as a loan, it was love. Love doesn't calculate, or so I thought. But slowly, cracks began to show. He started coming home later than usual, blaming client meetings and workload. His phone, once left carelessly on the table, became something he guarded like a state secret. He changed his passwords. He became distant emotionally, physically, and spiritually. I'd ask him if everything was okay, and he'd snap, "Why do you always assume something's wrong? Can't I just be tired?" I brushed it off at first, convincing myself that all marriages have phases. But then came the messages. One night after he fell asleep, his phone buzzed repeatedly. I tried to ignore it, but curiosity clawed at me. When I picked it up, the screen lit with a name I didn't recognize, Clara. My stomach twisted. Against every moral instinct, I opened the chat. What I read shattered me. "Last night was amazing," she'd written. "Wish you didn't have to sneak out so early." Madison replied, "You know how it is with her. Can't risk her suspecting yet." My heart stopped. Her. That was me. I read those words over and over until my eyes blurred with tears. I didn't know how long I sat there staring at the screen, but I knew one thing for certain. Everything I thought was real was a lie. He wasn't just cheating on me. He was planning to replace me. The next morning, I acted normal. I smiled, made his breakfast, and kissed him goodbye before he left for work. Inside, I was numb. I didn't confront him, not yet. Something inside me whispered that I needed to be smarter than my emotions. I began watching him quietly. I learned his patterns, the lies hidden between his smiles. Over the next few weeks, I discovered everything. Clara wasn't just some random fling. She was one of his clients. A wealthy widow in her mid-40s who had recently inherited a huge estate. Madison was manipulating her finances, pretending to help her manage her assets while helping himself to her bed. What disgusted me most wasn't the affair itself, but how easily he could come home and hold me as if nothing had happened. How he'd still tell me he loved me while lying through his teeth. I started gathering evidence. Emails, transaction records, and even surveillance footage from a private investigator I hired discreetly. What I found painted a much darker picture. Madison wasn't just having an affair. He was planning to transfer assets from my business into his new company without my consent. He'd forged my digital signature on documents I hadn't even seen. My love had blinded me so completely that I hadn't noticed I was being robbed from within. But I didn't break down, I transformed. That night, as I lay awake beside him, watching his peaceful face, I made myself a promise. I would not cry anymore. I would not scream or beg for answers. I would make him regret every ounce of deceit he'd poured into my life. Revenge wasn't in my nature, but justice was. One morning, just as he was leaving for work, I handed him a file and said calmly, "Madison, I need you to sign this for the new investment property." He didn't even read it, just signed where I pointed. He didn't realize that what he had signed was a legal authorization, transferring full control of his company shares and all joint accounts into my sole ownership. I had learned enough from him to know exactly how to play the game. Days later, he came home earlier than usual, unusually cheerful. "You'll never guess what happened," he said. "Claire is moving to France for a few months. She wants me to manage her estate while she's gone. This could be huge for us." He said us as if we were still a team. I smiled, pretending to share his excitement, while inside I was counting the days until his world collapsed. Then came the breaking point. One evening, after a heated argument over nothing, Madison looked me dead in the eye and said the words that changed everything. "I think you should leave my house, Isabella." "I'm done pretending. My house." He said my house. I felt a chill crawl up my spine. "Your house?" I repeated softly, barely recognizing my own voice. He crossed his arms, smirking. "Yes, mine. I've been paying the bills, maintaining everything while you sit there acting like some queen. Pack your things and get out before the weekend." I stared at him, and for a long moment, I said nothing. Then I simply nodded and whispered, "All right, Madison." He thought I was broken. But I wasn't. I was patient. I wanted him to taste the arrogance of his own ignorance before I took everything back. That night, I went to the study, opened my safe, and took out the property deed, the one with my full name on it. Isabella Moore, sole proprietor. The next morning, I placed it neatly on the dining table with his morning coffee. When he came down and saw it, confusion painted his face. "What's this?" he asked. I smiled calmly. "You asked me to leave your house," I said, sipping my tea. "I just thought you should see who really owns it." He picked up the document, scanned it, and the color drained from his face. His lips parted, but no sound came out. His arrogance dissolved instantly. "Isabella, what is this supposed to mean?" he stammered. I stood, looked him straight in the eye, and said, "It means you've been living in my house. The same woman you betrayed, lied to, and tried to destroy. You've been sleeping under her roof." That was the day Madison realized the real battle had only just begun. Madison stood frozen, holding the deed like it was a death sentence, his confidence crumbling faster than his lies ever could. The silence between us stretched long and suffocating, only broken by the faint ticking of the kitchen clock. For the first time since I met him, I saw fear in his eyes. Not the kind that comes from anger or loss, but the kind that comes when a man realizes he's been outplayed by the woman he underestimated. You tricked me," he stammered finally, still staring at the papers. I tilted my head slightly and smiled, though my heart was pounding with both pain and power. "No, Madison," I said softly. "I trusted you. You're the one who tricked yourself." He dropped the document on the table and ran a hand through his hair, pacing like a trapped animal. "So what now?" he snapped. "You're just going to throw me out?" I looked at him steadily. "You told me to leave your house," I reminded him. "I think it's only fair that you experience what that feels like." For a moment, he just stared, unable to process that the empire of deceit he had built was finally collapsing. He laughed a hollow, desperate laugh and said, "You think you can live without me?" You'd crumble without me. I walked past him, my heels clicking on the marble floor, each step echoing like punctuation to a chapter closing. We'll see about that, I said quietly, and walked upstairs to pack his things myself. I didn't do it out of rage. I did it with precision. I folded every shirt, every tie, every memory into a box and placed it neatly by the door. When I was done, I sat on the edge of my bed and looked around. The walls held so many fragments of our life together, pictures from holidays, anniversary gifts, little notes he'd left when things were still pure. I should have felt broken, but instead I felt light, like I was finally seeing clearly after years of living in a fog. When Madison came upstairs and saw what I'd done, his jaw tightened. "You're serious," he muttered. "Dead serious," I said without looking up. "You have until tomorrow to collect your things." He clenched his fists, his voice trembling between anger and disbelief. "You think this is over, Isabella? You think you can humiliate me like this and walk away clean?" I met his eyes and said coldly, "You humiliated yourself. I'm just giving you a mirror." He stormed out that night, slamming the door behind him so hard the picture frames rattled. I didn't follow. I poured myself a glass of wine and stood by the window, watching the moonlight ripple across the quiet street. Somewhere deep inside, I expected him to come back, to knock on the door and apologize, maybe even cry. But he didn't. He stayed away for days. When he finally did return, it wasn't for reconciliation, it was for war. He walked in with his lawyer and a smug grin, thinking he could intimidate me into surrender. "My client," his lawyer began, "has reason to believe that the property in question was purchased during the marriage and is therefore subject to equitable division under marital law." I smiled and slid a folder across the table. Inside were the documents proving I had bought the house 6 months before our wedding, using funds from an inheritance left by my late father. Madison's lawyer scanned the papers, his expression shifting from confidence to quiet defeat. Madison's smirk faltered. "You forged that," he accused weakly. "Actually," I said calmly, "you taught me how to spot a forgery. Maybe you should double-check the date stamps." The lawyer whispered something to Madison, who stood abruptly and stormed out, slamming the door once again. The sound didn't shake me this time, it empowered me. That night, I sat alone in the quiet house and thought about how strange it was that love could turn to ashes so quickly. I remembered the way he used to hold me when I was anxious, the way he'd say, "We're a team, Bella, always." I had built my life around that illusion, and now I was sweeping up the shards of it. But here's the thing about heartbreak: it doesn't destroy you. It reveals you. Beneath all the pain, I found someone I hadn't seen in a long time. Myself. A week passed, and Madison's downfall began to spiral faster than I had anticipated. The evidence I'd gathered about his financial misdeeds was more than enough to expose him. I anonymously forwarded the files to the authorities and his corporate board. Within days, his accounts were frozen, his clients started backing out, and whispers of fraud began circulating in his professional circle. He called me one night, his voice a mix of anger and panic. "What did you do, Isabella?" he shouted. "You ruined everything." I let him rant before answering quietly, "No, Madison. You ruined yourself. I just stopped protecting you." He cursed, said things meant to hurt me, to break me. But his words no longer had power. I hung up and blocked his number, then deleted every trace of him from my phone, my home, and my heart. Yet the story didn't end there. A month later, I received a call from Clara, the woman he'd been cheating with. Her voice trembled as she spoke. "Isabella, I think Madison used me too. He took money from my account. I just found out." For a brief second, I almost pitied her. She was a victim of his charm, just like I had been. "He always finds someone to drain," I said quietly. "I guess this time he drained the wrong person." Clara sighed, her tone thick with regret. "I thought he loved me." "We both did," I said before hanging up. That call didn't bring satisfaction, it brought closure. Madison had built his empire on lies, and now he was watching it collapse from every angle. Still, there was a part of me that wanted him to understand what he had lost. Not the house, not the money, but the love that once stood beside him. So one evening, when he showed up at the house looking like a ghost of the man he once was, I let him speak. He stood on the porch, his clothes wrinkled, his eyes hollow. "Bella," he whispered, the first time he'd called me that in months. "I made a mistake." I folded my arms, leaning against the door frame. "Which one?" I asked. "There were so many." He looked down, his voice breaking. "I lost everything. The firm is gone, Clara left, my accounts are empty. I don't even know where to go." I wanted to feel pity, but I didn't. "You told me to leave your house, remember?" I said softly. "Now you're standing outside it." He swallowed hard, his eyes glistening with something that looked like shame. "I thought I was in control," he admitted. "But you were the strong one all along." I didn't gloat. I didn't shout. I simply said, "Goodbye, Madison," and closed the door. Behind it, I leaned against the wood and exhaled. Not from sadness, but from release. That chapter of my life had finally ended. Over the next few weeks, I began to rebuild myself piece by piece. I poured my energy into my career, launching my own real estate consultancy, something I had dreamed of doing for years. It flourished faster than I expected. I began hosting empowerment workshops for women, teaching them how to protect their assets, their independence, and their dignity. I realized that my pain had turned into purpose. But life has a strange way of testing you, even when you think the storm is over. Months later, I received an envelope in the mail. Inside was a court summons. Madison was trying to sue me for emotional damages, claiming I'd deliberately sabotaged his career. I laughed out loud when I read it. The audacity was almost impressive. But I didn't panic. I had every piece of evidence to defend myself, and more importantly, the truth. When the court day came, Madison walked in looking defeated yet defiant. I sat across from him, calm and poised. My lawyer presented everything: his forged documents, the financial transfers, the affair. Every lie, every betrayal laid bare before the judge. By the end of it, Madison couldn't even look at me. The court ruled in my favor, and his case was dismissed with prejudice. As I walked out of that courtroom, I felt a peace I hadn't felt in years. That night, I stood again at the same window where I once watched him leave and whispered to myself, "You don't need revenge when you have truth." I realized then that power doesn't come from destroying others. It comes from standing firm in your worth. Madison lost everything because he never valued what he already had. I didn't just win a case, I reclaimed my life. But little did I know the world wasn't done testing my strength yet. Because just when I thought Madison was finally gone for good, fate brought him back into my path in a way I never expected. Months passed since the courtroom battle, and for the first time in years, the silence in my home felt comforting, not lonely. The house that once echoed with arguments and deceit now hummed with quiet music, sunlight, and peace. I had rebuilt my world from scratch, not with vengeance, but with purpose. My consulting business grew quickly, helping women reclaim financial control after divorce or loss. Every client I helped felt like a piece of my healing. Yet somewhere in the back of my mind, Madison's shadow lingered like an aftertaste I couldn't quite shake. I assumed he had vanished for good, maybe moved to another city to start over, but life has a strange sense of irony. One rainy Thursday evening, as thunder rolled through the sky, I got a call that froze my breath. It was from a local hospital. "Mrs. Bennett," the nurse said, her voice soft and professional. "A man named Madison listed you as his emergency contact. He's been in a car accident." My first instinct was to hang up, to pretend I didn't hear, but something inside me, maybe closure, maybe curiosity, it told me to go. When I arrived, the hospital smelled of antiseptic and rain-soaked air. I followed the nurse through a narrow corridor until she stopped at a room with the blinds half drawn. Madison was lying there, pale and weak, his face bruised but still recognizable. The sight stirred a mix of emotions I couldn't untangle: anger, sorrow, pity, nostalgia. His eyes fluttered open and met mine, and for a moment, all the chaos between us vanished, leaving only two broken people staring across the wreckage of what once was love. "Bella," he whispered, his voice cracked and fragile. I stood still, arms crossed, unsure why I'd come. "You shouldn't have called me," I said quietly. "There must be someone else." He shook his head weakly. "There isn't, not anymore." The nurse stepped in, checking his IV, and then left us alone again. I didn't sit. I just stood there, holding the edge of my purse like a lifeline. "Why me?" I asked finally. He smiled faintly. "Because you were the only person who ever really saw me, and even when I didn't deserve it." His words didn't erase the years of pain, but they pierced something in me. I didn't forgive him that night, but I couldn't walk away either. Over the next few weeks, I visited occasionally, not out of love, but out of humanity. He was recovering slowly, and the once arrogant man was now a shadow of himself, humbled by consequence. One afternoon, as I was about to leave, he said, "You know, I used to think success was about power, houses, cars, money. But when I lost you, I realized it was about peace. And that's something I never gave you." I didn't reply. I simply nodded and walked out, letting his words hang in the air like a confession too late to matter. A month later, I received an invitation from a women's empowerment conference asking me to be a keynote speaker. The topic, rebuilding after betrayal. I hesitated at first. My story was personal, raw, and full of scars, but I realized it could help others heal. The night of the conference, I stood on stage before hundreds of women. The lights were bright, the room quiet, every face turned toward me with expectation. I took a deep breath and began. "There was a time," I said, "when I believed love meant losing yourself for someone else. I believed endurance was strength and silence was grace. But I learned that true strength comes from knowing when to walk away, and true grace comes from forgiving yourself for staying too long." The audience was silent, some nodding, others wiping tears. I didn't name Madison, but I didn't need to. Every woman there knew her own version of him. When I finished, they stood and applauded. Not just for me, but for themselves, for every battle they had fought quietly behind closed doors. After the event, I walked outside into the cool evening air, feeling lighter than ever before. That's when I saw him again. Madison stood across the street, leaning on a cane, watching from a distance. He looked fragile but peaceful, almost grateful. Our eyes met briefly. He nodded, a silent apology that I didn't need but appreciated. I nodded back. That was the last time I ever saw him. A few months later, I learned from a mutual acquaintance that he had moved to a small town upstate, working at a local shelter, trying to make amends in his own way. Life has its own justice, sometimes quiet, sometimes poetic. Years later, I would find myself standing in the same house, now fully mine in every sense, sipping tea by the window as the morning sun poured in. On the wall hung a photo, not of me and Madison, but of me and the first group of women I had helped through my workshops. Their smiles reminded me that from the ashes of betrayal, something beautiful had grown. My pain had turned into power, and my heartbreak had turned into hope. I often thought back to that moment when Madison told me to leave his house. The irony was that I had spent years trying to belong in his world, not realizing that I already owned mine. One afternoon, as I was cleaning an old drawer, I found a sealed envelope addressed to me in Madison's handwriting. My heart skipped as I opened it. Inside was a short letter, written during his recovery days. "Dear Isabella," it began, "if you're reading this, it means I never had the courage to say it in person. You were never my downfall, you were my mirror. You showed me everything I didn't want to see about myself. I hope you found peace because you always deserved it more than I did." There was no return address, no signature, just those words, raw and real. I folded the letter, placed it back in the envelope, and smiled softly. Forgiveness, I realized, doesn't always need an apology spoken aloud. Sometimes it's found in understanding that both people were broken, just in different ways. That night, as the city lights shimmered outside, I sat by the window, thinking of everything I had lost and gained. Love hadn't destroyed me, it had rebuilt me. I thought about all the women who might still be living in silence, afraid to reclaim what's theirs, and I promised myself that I would keep speaking, keep helping, keep turning pain into purpose. The past no longer haunted me. It guided me. Madison had once said I couldn't live without him, but here I was, thriving, independent, and at peace. Life has a way of teaching lessons in the most painful ways, but those lessons become the foundation of who we're meant to be. If I could speak to the woman I was back then, the one who trembled when he said, "Leave my house," I would tell her, "You're stronger than you know, and sometimes losing everything is the only way to gain yourself." Because that's exactly what happened. I didn't lose my world. I just discovered the parts of it that were truly mine. And as I looked out into the quiet night, I whispered to myself, I got back more than I ever imagined. If you were in my place, what would you have done? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and stay tuned for more emotional real-life stories that will touch your heart.